In 1817, a ditch changed the world. Not a battle, not an election, not an invention in a laboratory. A ditch. 363 miles long, 4 feet deep, cut through the wilderness of upstate New York. And when that ditch filled with water 8 years later, it rerouted the entire economic future of a continent through a single city. A city that would become the financial capital of the world. Not because of ambition, not because of culture, but because of the shape of the land underneath it. This is the story of how geography made New York's financial dominance inevitable. And once you see it, you'll never look at a map the same way again. The Appalachian Mountains run like a spine down the entire Eastern Seaboard, from Maine through Georgia, nearly unbroken. The best land was on the wrong side of the mountains. But in New York, something remarkable happens. The Appalachians break. There's a low-elevation corridor running east to west through the state that simply doesn't exist anywhere else along the entire mountain chain. The Mohawk River Valley cuts through where the mountains should be, connecting almost seamlessly to the Hudson River, all the way down to a harbor at the edge of the Atlantic. A door in a wall that stretched 1,000 miles in either direction. And west of that door, waiting to be unlocked, was something that would make whoever held the key extraordinarily rich. An entire continent's worth of surplus. Wheat, corn, timber, furs, waiting for a path to market. But the most important resource New York had wasn't in the ground. It was its position. The state sat between two things that desperately needed each other: the agricultural surplus of the American interior and the Atlantic trade routes that could carry it to the world. Whoever controlled the path between them would collect the tolls on the most important trade corridor in the hemisphere. Geography had handed New York the corridor. What came next was whether anyone would be bold enough to use it. They were. And what they built would redraw the economic map of a continent almost overnight. Moving goods overland in the early 1800s could cost 10 to 20 times more per mile than moving them by water. Not a marginal difference. The difference between a product being worth selling and not. Water was cheap. Land was brutal. The critical question wasn't who had the best roads. It was who had the best rivers. New York had the Hudson, deep, wide, and navigable by ocean-going vessels 150 miles inland to Albany. Ships sailed straight into the interior. Albany became a major port not because anyone planned it, but because the river made it one. But Albany was still east of the mountains. The Mohawk Valley carried you west through the gap, but eventually the rivers ran out, and a stretch of land separated the Mohawk watershed from Lake Erie. Then that ditch I mentioned opened in 1825, the Erie Canal. 363 miles connecting Albany to Buffalo. A farmer in Ohio could now load grain onto a boat, float it to Buffalo, transfer to a canal barge, float east to Albany, and sail to a ship bound for Liverpool, all at water freight rates. No mountain crossings, just water end to end. The cost of shipping a ton of freight from Buffalo to New York City dropped by roughly 90%. That's not an improvement, that's a structural transformation. And every bushel of grain, every barrel of flour, every bundle of timber moving through that corridor passed through one city at the bottom of the Hudson. When you redirect that much commerce through a single point, cities don't just grow, they erupt. And the map of New York tells you exactly where the corridor ran. Albany, at the junction of the Hudson and the Mohawk. Utica, Rome, Syracuse, Rochester, marching westward along the canal route. Buffalo, at the western terminus, one of the fastest-growing cities in America after 1825. And at the eastern end, where the Hudson meets the harbor, New York City. The harbor is exceptional. Naturally deep, a drowned river valley carved by glaciers, ocean-going ships could dock directly without the expensive transfer systems that hampered shallower ports. Protected from Atlantic storms, ice-free year-round. Other American cities had good harbors, Boston, Baltimore, Philadelphia, but none had a good harbor and a low-elevation corridor straight through the Appalachians. New York had both, in the same place. That's why the city didn't just compete for dominance. It won so decisively that the competition effectively ended. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Because trade doesn't just move goods, it generates something far more durable than the canal itself. When enormous volumes of trade flow through a single point, they generate complexity. And complexity generates demand for solutions. Someone has to lend the farmer money before the harvest exists. Someone has to insure the shipment, exchange dollars for pounds, underwrite the ship, finance the warehouse, issue the letters of credit. Every one of those needs is a financial service, and every one gravitates toward the place where the trade is happening. That place was New York. By the 1830s, New York was the dominant American port. By the 1850s, it wasn't close. The Erie Canal had concentrated so much continental trade through the city that its banks, insurers, and commodity markets had scale no competitor could match. And scale in finance compounds. More deposits, more loans. More participants, better prices. More policies, more efficient risk. Each advantage feeds the next. The infrastructure grows. More business arrives, which grows it further. The famous institutions of Wall Street didn't arise because New York had uniquely clever financiers. They arose because an enormous river of commerce was flowing through the city, and institutions grew up around it the way trees grow along a riverbank. The Erie Canal is, in a very real sense, the origin story of Wall Street. If you like learning about how geography shapes economies, cities, and the way power accumulates, make sure to subscribe. Now back to New York. After the Civil War, railroads eclipsed the canal, but New York's position only strengthened. No longer just a geographic hub, it was a financial hub. And financial hubs are stickier than almost anything else. By 1900, New York City was the financial capital of the most dynamic economy in the world. Every advantage has a shadow, though, and New York's geography created some sharp ones. The corridor's power divided the state in two. Cities along the Hudson-Mohawk route grew with the trade. The rest, the North Country, the Southern Tier, the rural stretches far from the canal, developed on entirely different terms. Real industries, but without the structural tailwinds that defined the corridor. The Adirondacks are the clearest example. Cold, forested, bypassed entirely. The same mountains that gave New York its door also created a vast interior that commerce quietly routed around. And the state's concentration in New York City creates a specific vulnerability. When the financial sector contracts, as it did in 2008, the entire state feels it. So why is New York City the financial capital of the world? Geography didn't make this inevitable. The Erie Canal required political will. The merchants made choices. But the Appalachian Gap, the navigable Hudson, and the exceptional harbor combined to make New York's dominance far more probable than any other outcome. They stacked the odds. They set the incentives. In over 2 centuries, those incentives played out almost exactly as the landscape predicted. That's what geography does. It doesn't write history, it sets the stage. It decides which moves are cheap and which moves are expensive. And in the long run, cheap usually wins. New York is the proof. There's a reason the world looks the way it does, and it usually starts with a map. If that idea interests you, stick around.